my presentation is called The Canoe, the Power of Influence. And, self-improvement, that helps us influence people. So question, that I like to ask is, who has influenced you? In that first slide that you would have seen is there was a couple people on there. I had a picture of that first fire engine that I rode when I was 3 years old. And one of the individuals that influenced me, his name was Art French, or in town, he was called Frenchie. He was on the local volunteer fire department, and he worked with my Aunt Phyllis. And he was the one that was instrumental in getting me on the back end of that fire engine when I was 3 years old. And that was I was one of the last two kids to ever ride on the back of the fire engine. After that, they put an end to it. It was a Memorial Day parade. And so the following year, there was a large fire in a town down along the Delaware Bay. And as the trucks were going by, my dad took me out alongside the street. And then he had been a volunteer firefighter in another town in Jersey, and he gave me his badge. And so the firehouse was down the street, and so I always had an interest in that. So it was, who has influenced you? There's just been so many people. And one of the pictures I also had in my presentation, if you could click to the screen with the pictures of the fire engine on it, that would be great. Yeah. And the man in the upper left, I've never met him before. Obviously a Marine. That was my dad's brother Wesley. He was killed on February 1st, 1944, attacking a Japanese pillbox out on Roy Namur. The bottom right is Frenchie, and then my dad's in that center picture. There, as you can see, as a little kid, I was always interested in firefighting, and I haven't grown much taller than that picture that's right there. So John, could you go to the next screen, please? So who has influenced us, but also what books, movies, TV shows have influenced, us as well, because we are impacted by, a number of different influences. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. John, could you advance, please? Okay, so a big changing point in my life was this date, March 9th, 1972. I was 14 years old, and I came home from school, and I found my dad on the floor. He had died of his fifth and final heart attack. And there were no paramedics in our part of the state. There wasn't even any 911, it was just dial 0, dial the operator, tell them what was going on, and everybody in the area, with the exception of 2 fire departments, they were volunteers. So I had to wait until, they showed up in an ambulance very similar to that one there in the screen, and as they put my dad's body in the back of the ambulance, I vowed then that, I was going to do firefighting as a career, but I also wanted to be in the military as well. Can you go next screen, John, please? So the canoe, this is where the canoe comes into play. The gentleman on the lower left is my Uncle Cliff, and my Aunt Phyllis. This is my dad's sister. And that's my cousin Cynthia next to her. Uncle Cliff, he never stepped in and took over the role of a father, but he would take me canoeing with him. But one of the things that he did that was very influential in my life and impactful in my life is, I struggled after my dad died. I hated school. I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to quit. I wanted to join the military. Uncle Cliff had served in the Army during World War II. And other than knowing that he went ashore on June 7th, and other than that, he drove an ammo truck, and he always just said, I just had 3 of them blowing out from underneath of me. He never ever talked about the war beyond that. But one day when, I decided that it wasn't important to go to school, he took off work in the afternoon and came home, put me in his car, and he took me over to Vineland, New Jersey. And we went from recruiting office to recruiting office, and he drugged me in there. And we started with the Navy, and he pointed at me, and he said to the recruiter, this boy wants to quit high school and join. And she said, we won't take you. We went down the hall to the Marine Corps, and he said the same thing. He said, we won't take you. And then we went over to the Air Force, and the same thing. We won't take you. And because of his experiences in the Army, he said, well, I'm not going to, I know we got Army vets in here, so don't take this the wrong way, but his words were, I'm not going to take you to the Army. And so I got the message. Well, I finished school, okay? And he was a big influence in my life. John, could you go to the next one, please? So you can see that quote right there about John Maxwell. Leadership is influence. It's nothing more and it's nothing less. It is influence. So how do we influence people? Well, we got to develop ourselves. John, could you go to the next one, please? Okay, so the influence, my book, Frank and, had referred to it, that I wrote the book, and, and Kyle, read an introduction about that. The book was a long time in coming. For a number of years, my wife and daughters, they would say, hey, Rick, you ought to write a book. And, I'd head out to the fire stations. And one of my favorite things about being a battalion chief as a shift commander was going out and being with the troops. And inevitably, somebody would have a question. They're dealing with some type of a personnel issue. And the question would, come up. And then one of them guys would say, hey, you ought to write a book. Well, it started in August of 2017, and yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the book launch. But one of the things I wanted to point out here in the book is, although I built a setting around a firehouse kitchen table, the book's not written solely for firefighters. I was targeting that group that I mentioned earlier, those who are the entry to mid-level supervisors, but anybody, can get things out of the book. And it's based off of my observations, my experiences, and some of the most incredibly stupid things that I have done, in my life. I mean, if you read the book, you say, holy smokes, Davis, I can't believe it, that you did that, and I'll just leave the teaser here is, if you want to find out how I got in the fire department in the Air Force, you can buy the book, and then you'd say, man alive, somebody should have put a boot up your rear end, and that actually is Frank, that's actually the 4th area of change. You mentioned 3 areas that make people change. The boot in the rear end could be number 4, and that's what, I needed in my life. But some of the topics, I talk about integrity. I believe that integrity is the foundation, of leadership. Without it, everything else is going to start to crumble. But I talk about, anger, unhealthy team conflict, shedding bias towards subordinates, and then, developing ourselves and developing others. John, could you advance, please? Okay, so here's my purpose. My purpose and vision: influence, develop, transform the leadership abilities to entry to mid-level supervisors. So why am I doing this stuff? Well, I've got not only got a passion for it, but you can read that verse there from Luke 12:48. To whom much is given, much is required. To whom more is given, even more is required. God has allowed me to outlive my dad, by a number of years. Right now, I'm the oldest surviving member in the Davis family. And in our family, that's quite a feat. He died at 41. His dad died at 44. Everybody else has either died early of heart disease or they've been killed off, in a war. And so I'm very thankful. So God has given me a lot of opportunities, and we have a obligation and a duty to give back to others. When we develop ourselves, what Frank was talking about, when we read, and we're developing ourselves, we need to give back. I see so many people that their notion of retirement is, I'm done. I'm going to sit around McDonald's on the Monday morning McDonald's belly aching club. We're going to bellyache about everything underneath the sun, and they won't go out and they won't help people. We should not be that way. John, could you advance to the next one? The fire hydrant. Get on the left, it's my little dog, she's trying to decide whether or not she wants to do something with that hydrant. It's just sitting there on the corner, untapped potential. Well, that potential that's in that plug is not used until that picture in the upper right. You connect the hose to the plug, you connect the hose to the engine, you open up the valve, water in, water out, and it's used. And that's what I like to do. I like to tap into that untapped and that undeveloped potential to develop character-based leadership skills and abilities in people. John, next one, please. Okay, so how do I do this? I got to add, that man right there in that picture, his name's Ron Hill. Ron, you want to talk about somebody, a cowboy. Ron, born and raised up here in Loveland, grew up on a ranch. Has an incredible amount of knowledge of wildland firefighting. And you talk about somebody, Ron now 63 years old, he's still on the job. And you want to talk about somebody who believes in pouring his life into somebody else. That's Ronnie Hill. He's just a great guy. When I took over to Wildland program up here in Loveland. I brought Ronnie on board to take care of the training element, and he just did a fantastic job. But so how do I accomplish what I want to do? As mentioned in my bio, I'm a certified member of the John Maxwell team. Well, I do this in two fashions. And I do it through teaching and then coaching. And teaching seminars, workshops, mastermind groups, lunch and learn, speaking opportunities, and a leadership game. So what is the leadership game? It's something that I'm licensed to use through the John Maxwell team. It's a leadership assessment tool. Sit down with small teams or groups, and it's comprised of cards, a dice. Throw the dice, there's a color, and that dictates which question is read. And then it could be a question to an individual or to two people or to the entire group. And using that tool, I can see strengths and weaknesses that are present in the team. The other side is through the coaching, one-on-one coaching and group coaching. And so I know here in Colorado, it seems like every Tom, Dick, Harry, Betty, Sue, and Jane is a coach of some sort, or the other. So yeah, little Ricky Davis, he jumped into that one as well. John, could you go to the next one, please? So my advantages. So what's my advantages? Well, you can read the bullets over there. I got a lot of experience, 37 years on the job, and my time in the military, between the Air Force and the Marine Corps, I had 9 years. And somebody said, well, hey, why don't you just stay, Davis? Well, I jacked up my right knee, and the Marine Corps put me out on a medical discharge. And I want to also add, somebody probably said, whoa, wait, you went from the Air Force to the Marine Corps? Usually it's the other way around, but that's a different story. If you're ever interested in hearing that, I'd be glad to share that with you. But I've got a lot of experience working with this target audience, in daily settings, and then in settings, like this right here, rescue situations, fires, ever-changing situations. I understand the emotional and the physical impact of people after they've suffered these things. Got a granddad and his 9-year-old kid floating around on the ice out there when the ice shelf broke. I understand, our guys. I understand what happens, when, they're seeing death and tragedy. And so I have built and developed and worked with successful and professional teams. And I have the ability, after all those years, of seeing where the leadership gaps exist. I understand the problems, and I know how to bridge those gaps. So John, could you go to the next one, please? Okay. So yeah, this is my last slide here. And, just to tie back in, the book that served as a springboard into the business. It was this May, that I retired from the fire department. It was May of 2019 when I started the business, trying to work a business full-time, and work a 48-hour shift, 48 hours of on-call every other week, off-duty projects, meetings, emergency recalls. It just wasn't working, for me. And so after 37 years, my wife and we said, okay, it's time, so I submitted my paperwork, and I've been working the business full time since then. So my contact information is there. The book is available through my website in an autographed fashion. But it's also available through Amazon in print and ebook format.